Good evening, class. My name is Etienne Burnett, and I do apologize for not being available for our first Sure Sync. I am traveling for work at this time, and during the flight back home to the great state of South Carolina, the Sure Sync will be already in progress. However, for our first Sure Sync, we will be comparing the contrast of the NIST framework, which is used for federal information systems, and we'll be comparing it to the COSO, which is the Committee of Responsibility Organization Treadway Commission, their acronym. The NIST framework consists of 6 objects, and with those you see the categorization, select, implement, assess, authority, and monitor. And within these, you have basically identified a risk, and that risk is normally identified by some senior person within your organization. And then from there, you in turn select. With that selection, you are gathering information, you are doing the due diligence in order to determine how you want to mitigate the risk, and what is your plan of action for mitigating that risk. Once you have completed that, with any plan that needs to be implemented, you then implement the security controls that you have determined that's been outlined to help prevent the risk. Once it has been implemented and during that implementation stage, you will also assess. You're assessing what things are affected. If there are things that you still need to mitigate or gaps, during this time, it is the time to take the appropriate action to try to close those gaps. In addition, after it has been assessed, then you are authorizing the information system. You are basically have gone live at this particular point in time. This is the new change that is now in effect, and as such, you have documented it going forward. And after that, basically, you are just monitoring the security control, taking the due diligence to outline any type of requirements as far as management, number of personnel that may be needed to keep up the system and maintain it. The Committee of Sponsor Organization of Treadway Commissions, and I kindly pronounce it CISO. So if I'm pronouncing it incorrectly, please let someone know. I'm sure that I'll take a phone call or a video with a sound bite. However, this particular organization is made up of 5 different entities. And those 5 sponsors who sponsor this organization are the American Council of Associates. You also have the American Institution of Certified Public Accountants, the Federal Executive International, the Associates of Accountants and Financial Professionals in Business, and the Institution of Internal Audits. Basically, these 5 private sectors came together with the framework and guidance for an enterprise risk management system, basically for internal controls, and that would also use for fraud deterrent. And within this system, it's a 5-step system. And I can say just by looking at the overall framework, it is not as in-depth as your NIST standard. And normally anything in the federal government is very detailed. It's a very hard and trust but verified type of system. However, this framework is outlined basically with the number 1 is a controlled environment. You have your risk assessment, you have your controlled activity, and then you have information and communication, and you monitor. And with that controlled environment, basically you are using your human resource or policies and procedures, or your organizational structure, committee, some type of committee. So basically, it relates to your leadership. Basically, your leadership are ones who can make those decisions when it's time to implement a change. And they have identified a risk, and then from there you're doing your risk assessment. And doing your risk assessment, sometimes you have to manage your change internally. Sometimes people manage your change externally. Also, you're also risk identification and your analysis. So once again, you're doing your due diligence. You're looking over the current situation, determining what the risk is, and you're also trying to determine how you want to mitigate that particular risk. With their controlled activity, that's when we work on doing the work. Sometimes that work is outsourced. I know within my company, Google outsourced to EY or other companies that Scott Man, depending on what type of work we need to get that third-party support in order to be successful. Information and communication. This ideally is a type of effective communication. In any project, anything you do, especially with risk management, if you're not communicating it properly, things will get overlooked. The gap that you have in place will undoubtedly increase. So communicating is a very key part of that, and the quality of the information. You give good information, people can make good decisions. You give bad information, people are not apt to make good decisions based upon the information that has been given. The next step is monitoring. Ongoing monitoring in anything you do is the upkeep of it. For example, on the job, we implemented a system. We decided that one of the stakeholders would own the system. Ideally, the stakeholder did not have the bandwidth to maintain the system, so you have now increased the gap of something that was put in place to be successful to manage a type of security risk. However, the person that you're requiring to do it is not able to do that. So that type of monitoring is also very key to you look at the overall risk factors when you're managing to implement certain things and tasks. When we make the comparison of these two, the words are kind of small, but the number one thing I think is that the frameworks are very situational based upon your organization. NIST standards are probably used in anything that is federal and government regulated, because that's the federal government guidelines. I do know in corporate America that the NIST standards are now trying to be implemented in some of those frameworks in order to operate and be more secure because of the bounded detail that you have in them. And that's a good thing. Your organization may not be as robust. I know in a Fortune 500 company it may be a little difficult to kind of keep those specific standards because in the comparison that I'm making, the contrast would be the federal government follows specific guidelines, A, B, C, D. Corporate America sometimes does not. You have the ability to do the things that you want, and you operate sometimes in a environment that allows you to have a little bit more leeway. And if you're working in an environment that is very siloed, that will not allow this type of framework to be successful, because you're asking the human being to interact with other human beings in order for a better good to reduce risk. And I'll give an example, is that if anyone has ever dealt with NERC compliance and the SIP standards, that standards reach across a variety of stakeholders. And the problem that's with that is a federal regulated program is that people don't want to work together because they're so comfortable within their own scope of work. And then to be successful with any of these frameworks, you have to bring people together to work as one. So identifying risk is ideally key, but also the working together is one of the contrasts that I would definitely say. Comparison wise, I think they're both very good products. It just depends on your organization and what best fits your organization in order for it to be successful. At this point, I would have gladly taken any type of questions, but since I am not available for questions, I will see you guys on the chat. You take care, and thank you very much for your time. Have a good evening.